Welcome to our presentation, which is entitled Online Journal Publishing and Editorial Activism, Measuring Xchanges History as a Site for Access, Inclusion, and Impact. The overview of our presentation is here on this slide, and I will be speaking first. I'm Dr. Julianne Newmark. I'm the founding editor of Xchanges and the current editor-in-chief, and I will be talking about the research impetus for the project we're going to discuss today and giving a bit of an introduction. I'll be followed by Jennifer Burke Reifman, who will discuss our initial findings and give a survey overview, and the presentation will be concluded by Carolyn Jennings. She will discuss our findings and the study overall, and will give a peek into the next steps in this project. So I want to just point out the fact that Xchanges, while it is a journal, it also has a larger mission. We want to help to bring new voices into the scholarly publishing space. We've always conceived of ourselves as a pedagogical project, teaching both the students who are entering into this scholarly publishing space and also mentoring our faculty review board members, as I'll discuss later in this presentation. But something that we've tried to do over the last 20 years is also conduct research into how to teach certain aspects about editorial practices through students working on the journal itself, and using the journal itself as a teaching tool in writing studies classrooms. But another part of the multifaceted nature of the journal is that we have a research arm. Jennifer and Caroline and I are all part of this research arm of the journal, in addition to having some other roles as well. And this project that we're going to discuss today is part of the research initiative that Xchanges has a part of its work. We are studying metrics, and we're also doing IRB approved studies such as this one to better suit the journal to serve the audience that it is intended to serve. So this presentation shares some initial findings of a study that supports one of Xchanges' long-term research goals. We want to examine how writing studies, undergraduate research, education, and publication can facilitate digital activism and widen the participation of minority and underrepresented scholars in the scholarly publishing landscape. So our first step in working towards this goal was to collect survey data, which would elucidate the experiences of graduate and undergraduate students who have published in our journal over its 20-year life, and to examine any longitudinal impacts of publishing in Xchanges. The headline here is that our editorial team at Xchanges seeks to inform activist and equity-minded publishing practices. In this presentation, we will share early data collected from our IRB-approved initial survey circulation. This survey might be a model to be adopted by other undergraduate-serving journals, as we attempt to supply data in support of the claim that both undergraduate research and undergraduate publishing and early graduate education publishing are meaningful, impactful, and transformative practices. So over 20 years and 100 plus authors and 16 volumes, the open access e-journal Xchanges has published multimodal research and writing studies in support of a pedagogical access-oriented founding mission, opening the domain of academic publishing to undergraduate and graduate student scholars who seek entree to the often intimidating academic scholarship realm. By soliciting submissions from students, primarily advanced level undergraduate students and early stage graduate students who are engaged in primary research studies, Xchanges has strived to be and has indeed become a platform for entrance to academic discourse communities, particularly the often intimidating domain of the scholarly journal, for individuals who have never approached these domains before. With the encouragement of their professors, as we will discuss when we reveal some survey data later in this presentation, or as a result of their own exploration into potential publishing contexts, students submit their work to Xchanges. Their work is assessed for its appropriateness for our focal areas within writing studies writ large, and then the students' work is circulated to a diverse and dedicated body of faculty review board members. 2 reviewers read each submission. Central to our editorial ethos is the concept of mentorship. We do not want authors' first steps into an academic publishing domain to be negative, whether their work ends up being accepted or not. We train our reviewers in kindness-driven reviewing practices, as kindness, inclusivity, and supportiveness are central to our journal's identity. Our editorial mission, again, is rooted in kindness and has as its lodestar a pedagogical aim to continue, quote, teaching about research and publication. And by working with our submitting students who come from universities across the U.S. and abroad, universities and colleges of many kinds. In this new research study, we are asking new questions, which will reshape our editorial practices as we enter our third decade as a journal. How do we teach emerging scholars about accessible, in its variant usages, content creation, diverse topical engagement in writing studies, and entering academic conversations, quote unquote, across contexts? How do we teach reviewers and editorial board members about inclusive review practices and foregrounding human-centered anti-racist practices in our workflow? How might we give support so as to make publication more accessible to students from HBCUs, tribal colleges, and students representing regions from which we have had low publication rates in the past? Does our survey data collected from past authors reveal crucial places where we could improve in support of the above-named goal? This presentation reveals our answer-seeking attempts and the specific questions in the vein of editorial activism. We hope to further expand access to e-journal publication and enhance lasting impacts for our future authors. So the theoretical background is this. So this is an IRB-approved survey, and we are following earlier work, such as the work you can see on this slide and in our bibliography. We hope to understand the longitudinal impacts on past authors of publication in undergraduate journals, specifically, in this case, Xchanges. We specifically wanted to discover students' attitudes concerning the submission, review, and revision process. So our goal is to provide qualitative and quantitative data to better understand past authors' experiences in order to shape our future practices with an aim to make them more transparent and inclusive. So what the slides in the latter part of this presentation will reveal is that what we ended up finding through the study was only an initial approach to discerning the kinds of information that are the larger goals of our study. As noted above, we hoped to learn about past authors, their identities, and their experiences with the goal of reshaping the journal's editorial practices so that the journal can reach more emerging scholars from many regions, institution types, and mentorship histories. So in a way, the ultimate impact of the research will be programmatic if we understand the program level to be the macro level of the journal. On a micro level, then, is the individual author level. And here is where we can learn a great deal. Yet our data, as it will pertain to programmatic changes, is hampered by a certain skewing, as the results we will show reveal. Since the survey went out to past authors via an email list compiled from their original submissions, we have university email addresses for many. As Gmail addresses, for example, were not as prevalent over a decade ago, and many people use their university addresses as their primary email address, and we did not ask for an alternate address, it was harder for us to reach authors from over a decade ago than it was to reach authors from the recent past. Also, we found that many more graduate student authors responded than undergraduate writers. This is an issue we hope to address in the next component of this research project, when we will directly attempt to locate some of our past undergraduate authors so as to have a better representation by these authors in the study, as the undergraduate population is indeed more likely to feel a kind of alienation from the academic authorship realm that we hope to help students enter, but is intimidating to many undergraduate writers. Per our demographic findings, we have an incomplete picture, especially since, per our institutional memory and archives, we know that many undergraduate writers came from smaller, less traditionally, quote-unquote, research-focused universities, such as Research One institutions, than those represented by the graduate student writers. If we believe, as many journals that serve student populations do, that there is something valuable and important in creating a space for these authors to emerge in a scholarly publication context, we need to test this theory by hearing in the years post-publication directly from these authors. Perhaps these publication moments are not as important or impactful as we have long believed that they are, but perhaps they are as impactful and important as we have long hoped that they would be. So now let's learn a bit more about the survey itself, our initial findings, and our goals for future work.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Burke Reifman, and I'm going to take you through the second part of our presentation and describe the survey instrument and our initial findings. The survey we created is 35 questions long and is currently housed on Qualtrics. We designed a combination of open-ended, Likert, and nominal questions to understand students' attitudes, memories, and experiences around the publication process. We were specifically seeking both quantitative data to provide numerical snapshots and qualitative data to understand student authors' past experiences with the journal and its impact on their academic and professional lives. Because the e-journal provides publication opportunities for both undergraduate and graduate student writers, our questions needed to reflect the experience of both of those demographics. When writing the questions, we considered different needs between those two participant pools, including varying purposes for publication, whether research was collaborative or not, and the level of faculty involvement in the research. In building our questions, we included several domains to better understand the authorial experience. First, we wanted to understand the institutional context authors arrive from when publishing. We also wanted to understand their experience with publishing an academic article broadly, their needs while publishing, their dispositions and attitudes towards publishing, and the possible impact of publishing for students who went into careers in academia and otherwise. As of May 3rd, we have 30 survey participants. In the following slides, I'll provide snapshots of where these participants came from and some of the emerging trends we're seeing. To begin, about 75% of our current participants were graduate students while publishing, offering a particular window into that experience. Additionally, the bulk of current respondents come from the last 3 to 4 years, suggesting we need to make more effort in updating past authors' contacts and tracking them post-publication. Interestingly, respondents from this batch represent a fairly limited institution type, with the majority coming from four-year colleges and public institutions. While there is some representation from tribal colleges, HSIs or Hispanic serving institutions, and small liberal arts colleges, the representation in our data is fairly limited as of right now. This may suggest a need for better recruitment of authors from less represented institutions in the future. In a similar vein, we can see from this chart that 43% of past authors learned about the opportunity to publish with Xchanges from their faculty or advisor, while 36% learned about Xchanges through listservs like NextGen, Writing Studies, and the like. Responses from the other category included authors finding out about Xchanges through Twitter, internet searches, and conference attendance. This is another consideration for the Xchanges team in terms of outreach to potential authors. Additionally, these numbers might continue to shift as we see new responses. Otherwise, the initial examination of qualitative responses suggest participants hold an overall positive association with publishing. When asked to describe how they felt when they initially learned of their acceptance to Xchanges, we have found that answers indicate a positive impact to self-efficacy and confidence. Select quotes here from our initial analysis emphasize how acceptance was important to first-time authors, in that it gave them a sense of pride and made authors feel like they had something worthy to contribute to the academic conversation. In addition to building confidence, we've also seen that acceptance provided authors with a sense of belonging in the research community. As the last quote says, "To me, it meant I was finally a real researcher." Additionally, in the survey, we also asked participants to describe how publishing in Xchanges impacted their identity as writers, scholars, and students. Similar to the previous question, initial review of participant responses has suggested a positive impact to affirming their identities as writers and academics. Several participants mentioned that publishing this article had helped to relieve feelings of imposter syndrome, and others have commented on how it has prepared them for submitting future publications. While we continue to analyze data, we hope to have deeper understandings of the trends in participant responses. We also hope to collect more responses from authors further in the past to get a sense of how time can impact these reflections. Before I hand things over to Carolyn to provide some synthesis of these initial findings and a summary of our next steps in the research process, the final piece of data that might be of interest is this word cloud of participants' current work status. As you can see, there are still a number of respondents who are students or candidates in PhD programs, but most prominently is that many responses come from those in either an assistant or associate professor positions, as well as directors of writing programs and centers. As we continue analysis, we hope to see how current career is correlated to responses and find more participants who are outside of academia. Thank you for listening to this presentation so far. Next up, Carolyn Jennings will provide you with a sense of our next steps.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Jennings, and I'm going to take over from Jennifer and conclude our presentation with a brief discussion of our findings and a description of our next steps for this project and for the journal. So our study revealed that the publication experience for former authors was not only measured objectively, but it provided positive growth and scholarly independence. For the graduate student author cohort, the journal provided a useful transition from graduate student writing. So if we're thinking about seminar papers or conference papers to journal articles. Graduate student authors in the comments mentioned the value of integrating theory into articles, developing a scholarly identity, and cultivating an awareness of writing for a larger discipline. For graduate students, we noticed the following themes emerging from the data. Publication aided their identity as scholars. Students perceived publication helping with imposter syndrome. The editorial process was more straightforward. It was made more transparent for students. Graduate student authors felt included in disciplinary conversations. So the major takeaway was that graduate student authors felt supported and encouraged as scholars and not just as students, and the journal aided that mental and intellectual transition. Now let's move on to talking about the findings for undergrads. For undergraduate writers, the publication process affirmed their abilities as researchers and strengthened their relationships with faculty. At least one participant in the comments referenced publication supporting his or her mentorship with a faculty member when writing for an audience beyond his or her, quote, small private college, end quote. This particular finding was key in understanding how undergraduate publication can build expertise and confidence for students in smaller academic environments. So for future work, our journal may think about the following or resources for students that could include the following. We might think about informational articles on the publication cycle, style guides and citation resources for print and digital texts, resources for peer review, and then bibliographies and web archives for cultivating academic style and voice. So the major takeaway from this section was recognizing that the editorial process was more transparent for students and the selection process was demystified, and that publication strengthened mentorship with faculty. So now let's move on to a discussion about the implications and the future research. Our emergent findings begin to provide insight into students' intellectual formation and identity as scholars and researchers. Consistent across both cohorts was increased confidence and independence after going through the publication cycle. And this finding was the same for both grad students and then also undergrads. We also saw that for both groups, voice and scholarly perspective was very important. For some student authors, they identified voice and scholarly perspective as criterion that had an impact on their experience as emerging writers. So these comments reveal that it was scholarly development and identity formation that had the most lasting impact for student writers. So it wasn't primarily focused on the more technical or journal specific skill sets. More analysis is needed to understand this aspect of the data. So future research could involve offering student authors training on journal specific style, developing an academic voice, and understanding or integrating editorial comments. Many student authors reference collaboration as a key process for improving their writing and making the most out of their journal experience. The survey is the first component of our process. We aim to create discussion within writing studies and undergraduate, graduate student education to sustain equitable publication resources for authors. We intend for our resource and our research to be a starting point for scholars to investigate how confidence and identity formation are crucial for equitable publication practices. We also found that we needed to expand our recruitment efforts for new authors as evident in the types of institutions that we found in our sample. So our next steps would involve outreach to faculty and students in less represented institutions, creating resources for underrepresented students to build confidence, and then draft and publish a journal article to report our findings. With our preliminary results, we wish to include more support for student authors in navigating the editorial process. So instead of affirming our current work, we intend to use this data to further equitable publishing practices for a more diverse set of incoming authors. We intend to do the following for the future: cycle through our data again and find more evidence of previous authors' concerns, problems, or obstacles that came up. Code our findings to identify patterns of previous authors' challenges. Determine how the editorial process can be more accessible and transparent for authors, both for grad students and for undergrads. Brainstorm resources and online workshops for new student authors. And then the last step, draft a collaborative article detailing best practices for equitable publication and writing studies. So if you have any questions about our research or would like to reach out, please contact us at the emails listed below. Thank you.